Hello, 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 and welcome to the 5th episode of Cannesversations. I'm Eliana.
And I'm Patrick. Hi.
Hi. Now, Cannes is over. How are you feeling?
Uh, I still feel a bit fatigued by it overall, which is, quite strange after all these days. But overall, you really learn to look back on these festivals and then maybe in the moment sometimes they even disappoint you to some degree, but when you look back, you still have a lot of fond memories of meeting people there, of seeing films that in the first moment you may not be able to appreciate as much as it turns out later. So, yeah, I think only time will tell. But right now, I'm also happy to be back and, live on a regular basis.
Yes, yes, indeed. There was a 12-day, 14-day, 13-day. Time was suspended for me.
Right.
And I remember my expectations were scattered, and scattered they did turn out. But there was the ceremony. And so, Patrick, can you tell me what happened in the ceremony? Would you like to go through some of the prizes that were awarded this year?
Right, yeah. And I guess we can't get around it. We have to name a few. And maybe we should start with the one that was the first big one and that surprised me in a way that I didn't expect. So there was the Camera d'Or, which is the
Hmm.
prize for the best debut, and that went to Inside the Yellow Cocoon Shell, a film we talked about on our last
Hmm.
episode, a film we both really liked. If there was buzz at all, that I think in any way is not really comparable to last year's, maybe, let's say, After Sun, that had a lot of buzz even at the festival back then. Uh, this one, maybe, it's also a very different film, much slower, much less accessible, I would argue. But yeah, I was very happy and I saw the entire ceremony in the Debussy, which was nice. And
Hmm.
there were so few people that I basically felt like I had the whole balcony area to myself with a friend of mine. And that felt nice too. It was, like having a cinema as your living room or something. And
Mm.
yeah, I'm really happy about this award. And I thought, oh, if it starts with such a good decision, how will this continue, this ceremony? Yeah, we have a lot of other interesting choices, I think. No, a lot of people on social media made fun of the fact that Ruben Östlund is better at awarding films than his films.
Oh my.
Too polemic for me. I think he is very good at what he's doing. Not that all of his films succeed in the way that I would like them to, but this was a very good choice, which of course wasn't his decision. I think there's an own jury for that. But in any case, so that made me happy. Then we have, it seemed more and more the more it went on the ceremony, the more it became sort of duel between the Justine Triet film Anatomy of a Fall and
Hmm.
Jonathan Glazer's The Zone of Interest, a film we also talked about in our last episode.
Hmm.
And yeah, it turned out when they announced the grand jury prize, which is only topped by the Palme d'Or, and that turned out to be
Hmm.
Jonathan Glazer, who I don't want to interpret too much into that, but his facial expression was a bit got a bit stony, maybe a bit frozen. So
Mm.
you could tell that there may have been certain expectations, but yeah, he still was awarded that prize that I think is still an honor, I suppose. uh, But yeah, then it was sort of clear, oh, this is going to be Anatomy of a Fall. And
Hmm.
especially when then Jane Fonda went on about, oh, this year there are 7 women in competition, which is, a
Hmm.
record of the festival's history. And then it was already clear, that, oh, this is going to be awarded to a woman. And there was only Justine Triet, really, about whom a lot of people felt this might be a strong contender. And indeed it was, and was awarded the Palme d'Or. That, of course, she took the stage there to make a political address. She spoke about the strike that we
Hmm.
mentioned.
The pension strikes.
Exactly.
We actually didn't mention them. We mentioned them in an earlier rendition that wasn't.
Oh, so that was cut out.
That was cut
I
out.
wasn't aware of that. So maybe
So,
could you remind people of what was going on in France?
so over the past 2, 3 months, France has been in a state of protest against Macron's pension reform. Essentially, he has demoted the age of retirement from what previously was the age of 62 to the age of 64. And this has caused a lot of grief amongst the general French population and even led to some threats of protestation of Cannes itself, which did not manifest. I believe there was a small protest in front of the Carlton Hotel, which primarily was hotel staff, but a lot of people have been very upset by change in the age because it works for the benefit of those who are in positions with tenure, but for those who are doing jobs such as picking up trash, more hands on work, this is upsetting news. What Trier did, she took the stage and she took the award and she made a statement.
Yeah, she basically complained about the uh, neoliberal politics of Macron. She also mentioned that the film industry in France is becoming more and more concerned with just profit making and not allowing directors, second chances. This went even so far that her speech was addressed in the parliament, in the French parliament, which I think is quite remarkable. I don't think that happens so often. And you could also clearly see that Emmanuel Macron wasn't very happy about that because when Titan won 2 years ago, he
Mhm.
congratulated Julia Ducournau and tweeted that publicly. This year, of course, nothing happened from his side. So you can tell that this was probably noted, and
Mm.
silence can be interpreted in a way that's very clear. So, in any way, it's at all interesting, that something like movies, they still matter societally.
Mhm.
They still have an impact on the broader discourse, and that's a lovely thing to just, to realize. And I think it's a nice reminder.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah, and anyway, maybe uh, there's also talking of rather good decisions. I think it was not a bad choice to award the Japanese actor Yakusho Koji with the award for Best Actor. He was in the Wim Wenders film that I
Mhm.
did not really care for, but I think if I had to praise one element of that film, it would be his performance. So kudos to that
Mhm.
decision. We also had, because when it became clear, it was also another indicator, like when Sandra Hüller didn't win for
Mhm.
Best Actor, a female
Mhm.
actor, you could tell, okay, this must mean that there is a bigger prize that Anatomy of a Fall will be awarded later, and that's how it came about. So this award went to Merve Dista in About
Mhm.
Dry Grasses, and I think that's a
Mhm.
performance we both very much appreciated as well,
Yes.
right?
Yes. No, she had an incredible presence that worked well with the script and just the dynamic and tension that she had with her opposite protagonist of
Yeah,
Summit.
yeah, and it's pretty remarkable that she wasn't even, she isn't even the proper protagonist of that film. She's, she becomes at some point of the film very central to the film, but for a
Mhm.
long time she's also absent in that film. So that was nice to see that she still gained that recognition.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think we don't have to talk much more about the ceremony here. I think it's nice also to see that Janos Films, they picked up the rights for the US for About the Grasses, I think together
Mhm.
with another distributor that doesn't come to mind now. So it's good that this film, this will not be lost on people. This will at some point be showing in the US. Yeah, I guess you could see that maybe in like IFC or something, like a very small theaters. Basically, also just East and West Coast, I suppose. But that's what those sort of films usually. Those are the only markets for these films, right?
Mhm. Yes, well, it does seem like a few other awards were also picked up by some female directors, and that's going to be a bit of a theme today. There was How to Have Sex by Molly Manning, which we will not talk about at this moment. Was a film that I think was able to touch quite a large audience. Not sure how I feel about it, but it honed in on consent and the vagaries regarding consent, which is something that has not been explored. However, it would have been nice to see. Did it get that feeling when the time for something has passed? Was it mentioned in any awards?
Uh,
The Joanna Arnaud.
I don't, I don't recall that, but I think we should say that How to Have Sex won un certain regard, which is,
Hmm.
the second biggest category here in Cannes. Even though, I
Hmm.
hear so many people complain about that category that, it's a bit like in Berlin, you have the panorama section, and in Cannes, I
Mm.
think a lot of people are often dissatisfied with the films from un certain regard, but it's still this prize is still considered to be, prestigious. I think if I'm not mistaken, last year, Return to Seoul won in that
Hmm.
category. So, there you can tell that this brings about good titles, this
Hmm.
section. But I think there is also, there are a lot of films that I don't feel very positive about. Uh, but yeah, in any case, shall we move? Shall we
Yeah.
move on here to
So, moving on from that, we are going to actually follow a thread of female directors that were in competition. This year, there were a total of 7, but today we'll be talking about 3. We'll start with Justine Triet, Anatomie d'une Chute, or Anatomy of a Fall. And then we'll go on to Catherine Breillat. And we will finally end with
Alice Rohrwacher?
Alice Rohrwacher. So Catherine Breillat's L'été dernier, or Last Summer, and Alice Rohrwacher's La Chimera, the Chimera.
Right. I think
I suppose.
uh,
Mm,
even the English title might just be, the original one because
perhaps.
I don't know. I guess La, people will still
Yeah,
will still
the.
get that. Uh,
All right. So we'll start with the Palme d'Or winner. Now, you didn't see this coming as a winner originally, did you? I mean, this film, where to begin? It features a Franco German couple who have a son and a dog who live in the mountainous region in France. And the mother, played by Sandra Hüller, is a writer. The father is also a writer or professor. And the film turns into an investigation over the death of Samuel, the father, and Sandra Hüller's character is investigated for this suspicious death. An Anatomy of a Chute, even though we have the physical body, which falls out of a window, we have really the dissection of the relationship that's on full display in the court setting.
right. And in German you have this nice ambiguity of, in German it's also Fall, but that
Hmm.
refers to case. So, it's at the same, yeah,
Case.
at the same time it's a case, like
Hmm. Ah, I see.
in terms of investigation maybe, and it's,
Hmm.
the fall, like falling down somewhere.
Hmm.
So I think that's at play, if you had this title in German, and that's a nice, that sort of introduces the film already in very ambiguous terms.
Mm-hmm. Now, Patrick, how did you feel while watching this film? Or what did you think of this film?
Yeah, at first I was really impressed, and if you had asked me in the middle of the maybe first half of the film if this is a Palme d'Or contender, I would definitely say yes. I was very impressed by just really the staging of Triet. It starts in a very funny way. We see Sandra Hüller being interviewed by a younger journalist who seems also
Mm-hmm.
to be a bit starstruck with her and at the same time trying to be professional about the interview. But this interview is constantly interrupted by PIMP by 50 Cent.
50
Yeah, and
Cent.
we just hear the instrumental of that song, but it's played again and again and again. It becomes the sort of leitmotif for this film. And at that
Mm-hmm.
moment, I thought, oh, wow, this is so confidently shot. We have very interesting camera work here because the camera overall is very subjective. It has this strange quick zoom on people's faces occasionally, if you know,
Mm-hmm.
almost like it hits people by surprise. Then the camera is also subjective in the way it moves around in a way just people move around. It pans to the right, to the left. It's very unsteady in that respect. And even the way just this first interview contrasts Sandra Hüller and whose name here in the film is also Sandra.
Mm-hmm.
The way it contrasts her laid backness with the
Mm-hmm.
journalist's eagerness. It was greatly captured. I was totally in for that ride, and he had even continued that way until I think we reach the stage of the court drama, and then it becomes a bit more conventional. And then I thought it somehow lost a bit of steam. But this first half, what I really liked about it the most is depicting process. I think depicting process is one of the most cinematic things you can do. Like, really confront us with a sort of reality that we are not used to, but that is so mundane to other people. It's so natural to other people. We really see, if the film is called Anatomy of a Fall, that is
Mm-hmm.
really to show us how the investigators, how they go about reenacting what may have happened. You see how
Mm-hmm.
a dummy is thrown out the window uh, in order
Mm-hmm.
to see how the splashes of blood, how they may have stained the wall, because we have these conspicuous three driplets,
Yes.
drops on
Mm-hmm.
on the wall, and it seems to the investigators that this is uh, rather unlikely, that if this person just fell out of the window, or even, I don't know. We of course don't even know if there is some suicide or something uh,
Mm-hmm.
that may have been committed. But yeah, people are very uncertain about what has occurred, and we as an audience are also not privy to what happened, because we follow the son who goes out for a walk with the dog while the incident happens. And yeah, we are very much not in the know here as well.
Mm-hmm. No, I was impressed by how much control of little facts. Like, I don't know for you, but for me, I didn't realize, I don't know if this is giving it away too much, but I didn't realize the son has a certain inability to sense something. And for me, this did not become obvious until a little bit later in the film, where it becomes of more importance. I was also very impressed by the use of taking sound and weaponizing it. This occurs from the very first scene with the interviewer journalist and Sandra Hüller's character, as well as it comes back to haunt us later scene with when the insecurities of this creative couple are really put under the microscope. And it reminded me in some ways of Saint-Omer, because this film was not quite interested in finding a concrete culprit, but was rather interested in exploring the relationship within a courtroom setting, as if to say, what is the truth of a person that we know when they pass away? Who are they actually to us? And understanding from each perspective in the triangle of son, mother, father, what the other could mean to one another.
Right.
I don't know if it worked for you. I'm still also trying to digest the ending, as to whether there is an ultimate ideology at play or belief inherent to what it means for the verdict to have taken on more of a reliance on the child's point of view at the end, and in determining truth.
No, to me, it really stayed open until the end. I wouldn't say that the film, to me, it didn't make the impression as though it was interested in providing us with some answers with regard to the literal fall here. You mentioned having this relationship under microscope or something. I would say we really rather have it on the silver screen. It becomes
Mm.
very broad, like very big. It becomes monumental in a sense because we have this scene that is perhaps the scene of the film, or like, if there will be awards conferred to, let's say, Sandra Hüller or something in the future,
Mm-hmm.
or even if she's just nominated, you will see a certain, is a fight, a fighting scene of the couple. You'll probably see that again and again in,
Mm-hmm.
these trailers they have then for the award season. And that's, however, for me, and I think we talked about it even, off microphone. We talked about that at least, I was not convinced of that scene. I think it's a very powerful scene. It's a very strong scene, but it doesn't quite
Mm-hmm.
serve the film formally because this film is so much concerned with us not knowing things. And then
Mm-hmm.
it shows us, because we really rely on tape recordings here. That's what you mentioned earlier, or what you referred to, that
Mm-hmm.
sound is weaponized. And so the husband, because he is really, that's at least one part of the story that we hear, he is not getting on with his novel. He has been working on a
Mm-hmm.
novel for a while, but it is, in fact, Sandra Hüller who's been successful with her literary work. And in one of the court scenes, we hear this tape recording being played, but then instead of just providing us with that, we actually see how the scene plays out with the actors instead
Mm-hmm.
of just staying there in the courtroom. And I think there it's sort of like the film turns against its own poetics. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, like, on the one hand, it's really a powerful scene, but I don't think it does the film a great service in the broader picture. Uh, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's also where I think it felt like it needed to, in accordance with certain rules of the genre. And yeah, I don't know how you felt about that.
Right. I actually read an interview with Justine Triet, and she said that if it were up to her, she actually, this was a little bit iffy because I think, isn't it not up to you? But she said that she would have liked to have 10 minutes of just hearing the recording, and that she did not want to use any flashbacks because she found sound to be so persuasive, even more than I guess, than images. But in this case, her use of a flashback, which is a somewhat incomplete flashback, to try to, I suppose, give us some gray area to work with the weaponization of the recording. But it's a bit upsetting to hear that she originally didn't want to use it, and that you're saying here, and I also agree, that it might have been stronger to have just not had a visual that accompanied the playback of the recording.
So, but I feel like I don't quite follow. Like, why did she not do that?
I don't know, to be honest. I really
Oh, okay.
don't know why she. It was just rather. I read that she said she would have preferred to have done that. So I wonder what went on behind the scenes, since I think it would have made for a very powerful moment too, to also just soak in that tension of being in the courtroom as we hear live with the rest of the court, just this sound,
Right.
and how we then decide how we interpret what may or may not have gone on. Because towards the end of this recording, there is a physical altercation which is open to interpretation, as if the words are not enough, that physical abuse could be more damning than the actual verbal parry that goes on between the couple.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps speaking of couples, one should also add that, even though this is a female-centered episode here, and I don't want to take away from this, but this film was also co-authored, with Justine Triet's partner, Athieu Harari. One may have seen the Onoda film that premiered in Un Certain Regard in Cannes 2 years ago or something, that was directed by him. And I think when we see these, fights among the couple play out, I
Mm-hmm.
think perhaps, being a creative couple, that may have had some influence on that as well. And I
Mm-hmm.
think what we talked also about, not on the podcast, is the notion of language here that I think is fascinating,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes. Mm-hmm.
uh, could you say something about that?
Even in what Trier does, which is very simple, she inverts perhaps what we believe to be the stereotypical successful couple. The female here is the one who is successful. She is the one who has gone off and lived her creative life, quote unquote, to a higher degree of success than the male. And I think that that also comes with it some manipulation of language. So I don't know. Just that it's a very simple trick of inverting the gender, and then in terms of language, what the impact is on a child, perhaps, because I think in the very final third, it becomes how words really matter. Often there are periods where we see mouths moving, but we don't hear audio. Then there's something where we see the inverse, and then we also see at some point something that plays with that very idea of what is, how are we supposed to interpret the language that is being spoken to us, and whether language actually or words actually are the ultimate thing that can get across what it is that is meaningful. I don't know. At some point in the film, too, it becomes an issue of whether fiction or reality, a defense of the arts. A character says, "Am I supposed to be here explaining to you that an outline of a novel is different from an actual
Right.
from a novel, or was it reality that they said
I think of a novel, yeah, because
of a novel?"
it is. I think it's maybe not too much of a spoiler. I think we can say that Sandra, the protagonist, she apparently took, one one outline of her husband that he was never able to, develop further to a novel. She took
Mm-hmm.
that idea and then became very successful with that novel that she wrote based on that idea. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and it's fascinating. Often they discuss their that something that is said in a certain context may not be a universally, true statement, even, that some things just arise, out of a heightened emotional state, and then you
Mm-hmm.
have to really understand the context in order to know what language means here. And but I also just wanted to, go on a very fundamental, elemental level here and say that, of course, we see Sandra Hüller here speaking primarily English, which is,
Ah,
of course,
yes.
not her mother tongue. That is also
Mm-hmm.
mentioned in the film. And then this couple speaks primarily in English, but then in the court scene, we have this conflict that in court, it is not really acceptable there to speak in English. So you have also uh, you see her sometimes being in conflict with her French. You know, her French is not very strong, and she has to navigate that as well in a very uh, again, a very heightened emotional state, right? Like she doesn't want to do
Hmm.
any mistakes here. And it's also just very interesting when she is in conversation with the lawyer that takes on
Hmm.
a bigger role throughout the film. Uh, in the way he is sort of coaching her to use the right words at the right time and
Hmm.
not maybe pertain too much to emotion, you know, and certain tips you would just be given in such a situation and that you, as a viewer, may not necessarily think about.
No, yes. Going off of that, wanted to do a small analysis of the names, and Zandra actually means protector of humanity. Samuel, her husband's name, means God has heard, or God has set, or God has placed. And Daniel, their son's name, means God is my judge. And I think that's a small detail which perhaps could go unnoticed, but I think it does play quite a large role in the development of their story.
Right. Um, yeah, maybe just also about this relationship between Trier and Sandra Hüller. Sandra Hüller was also part of her last film, Sybil, that I did not see,
Hmm.
but it's nice to see that that apparently this relationship must have intensified because in Sybil she wasn't, the leading role, and now she like you cannot have a bigger leading role, I suppose, than this in terms of
Hmm.
presence and in terms of centeredness of the narrative. I think it's heavily centered on her, and I think she gratifies that, or like she is, she makes the most out of that. And
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, I believe after the initial projection of the film, Trier said that she had essentially written this character with Sandra in mind, um, which makes sense given everything that you've said. Um,
yeah,
yeah, is there anything else? Because how did you instinctively this is a film that has grown on me, and I wonder if it's because I know that it has won the Palme d'Or. There are a lot of elements in there that are technically almost perfected, which I think work for it, and also I'm not sure. It confuses me. This film confuses me in my reaction to it because you earlier talked about how you weren't.
yeah, I think those phenomena are always fascinating, right? Like how you see things differently when they get like societal recognition, when they are part of the discourse or something. You may want to reevaluate your opinion or your stance on something. I think for me it hasn't changed so much. I still think, if it were just the first part of the film, I would find it utterly amazing. It's really such great filmmaking, and I think, I mentioned that to you uh, off the mic as well, that this is the
Mm-hmm.
perfect showcase of how to make a film. It uses so many elements so well.
Mm-hmm.
What we talked about before, this just the camera, the way how to portray your protagonist, how to
Mm-hmm.
develop themes,
Mm-hmm.
even on a holistic or even on a like, visual level, on a what's the word, auditive, not auditive, but no, on
Auditory.
the uh, on the acoustic level as well. And yeah, those things are all fine, strong. I also even like this aspect of this inner conflict of how one sees oneself and how one has to present oneself in order
Mm-hmm.
to, in order to uh,
Mm-hmm.
be understood by people, or in order not to be incarcerated as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's really, and I mean, you mentioned, as I think I heard a few people say before, you mentioned Santo Mare, and
Mm-hmm.
this was really a showcase of how you can make a courtroom drama that is not a traditional courtroom drama. And I think the more it, you know, the more it accessed this sort of territory, the less I was, impressed by this film. The more
Mm-hmm.
conventional I found it.
Mm.
And yeah, so I think for me it's a mixed bag, but I'm still positive on the film. I just think if it had continued uh, the way
Mm-hmm.
it did in the first half of the film, I would have been really
Right.
amazed.
Very quickly, just because I'm curious before you wrap up, but how did you find, as you are a lover of literature, this interrogation in court? Did you find it was just banal, or did you find it was getting to a point? Because at the end of this interrogation, they essentially, one of the lawyers or even the judge deems fiction is more compelling.
Yeah, this is one of the aspects that I was also not so fond of because I think it was heavily overwritten in this
Mm-hmm.
courtroom section. Not even the scene you just mentioned, but also especially when when the son, is to when the son becomes the help me out here.
The
Yeah, the
witness,
witness.
or mm-hmm.
Because I think the way his dialogue is written here, that's just, it's too poetic. It doesn't really, it doesn't reflect on how a 10-year-old or so would talk. It's very polished in a sense that I found was not really you know, true to such a
Mm-hmm.
situation. And yeah, so all these polished aspects, I think they bothered me. I have to be honest here.
Mm-hmm. And so that actually gives us a really nice segue into precocious young boys. Perhaps not so precocious in this case, but we can move into L'été dernier, or Last Summer, by Catherine Breillat. This film features Anne. She is a woman who is around 50 years old. She's
I think she's a
married.
bit younger, but
Okay, a bit younger, a bit younger. She's married and they have two adopted children, and she's visited. Well, her stepson Theo comes to live with the family, and this is actually a remake of the Danish film *The Queen's
Queen
Heart*.
of Hearts.
No, *The Queen of Hearts*.
No,
The Queen
just
of
Queen of
Hearts.
Hearts.
Queen of Hearts, that was purchased by producer Said Ben Said, who is also well known for his production of films such as Elle by Paul
Right,
Verhoeven. I say this name incorrectly. And what else? Passion by De Palma. Recently, I think he produced Passages by Ira Sachs
exactly.
and a couple of others that I'm actually quite fond of,
And
really.
I think it just if since you mentioned Paul Verhoeven, also this film was co-written by Pascal Bonitza, who also
Ah,
co-wrote Benedetta.
Benedetta.
Exactly.
Okay.
So, and before knowing that, I thought, oh, in a sense, Breillat and Verhoeven, they
Hmm.
are sort of, evil twins or something. You know, they they are in the same way daring, and they are in the very same sense audacious and also a bit anachronistic, are they not? Like they don't really seem to fit in today's not
Hmm.
moral standards maybe, but today's like politics.
Just political atmosphere of what is considered to be making politically correct films, or.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
So in that sense, they are really they seem to be siblings,
Mm.
Breya and Verhoeven.
I see
Also,
what you mean.
of the same age, more or less. Both. I don't know if Verhoeven is already 80, but they are both heading towards 80, at least in their
Mm.
70s. So I think there are similar sensibilities at play and a similar ignorance of might, you know, what might, uh,
Be the downfall of. Not the downfall, that's a bit extreme. Continue.
or just might be very provocative to the audience.
Mm-hmm. All right. Tell me more about L'été dernier.
Yeah, so I've seen a few Breillat films in the past, also really in preparation for the festival. I must say, make me reflect on scenes later, even if it's maybe not the entire film, but there are always scenes that I think things stick with you. And she often has similar premises, like there's often an older man and a younger woman, or like a younger man and an
Hmm.
older lady. There was, of course, the case in this film, Brief Crossing, that I think
Right.
we both saw together.
Yes.
And there are some parallels between that film and this film here. Of course, we have this Amasseur, which is
Hmm.
considered to be maybe her classic, or one of the films that is most revered in her filmography. Even though, of course, I think that's a very controversial film, not just because of what is depicted, but also about the history of shooting that film. I don't know if you know more about that.
All I know very superficially is that she had found a 13-year-old girl, perhaps named Anaïs, and her character's name was also Anaïs, and she asked Anaïs to perform certain scenes naked, and later on it came out that it had made the 13-year-old Anaïs very uncomfortable, which is never good to hear about a film production. The film itself is also challenging, very much in terms of what it means to be or to find or to desire, I suppose, when we're at such a young and tender age. It pits the younger sister, who is less physically attractive and less desirable by societal standards, against her older sister, who is more desirable by these similar societal standards. And really was a film that people should see, but that people often comment, as one of our friends said, this might be problematic.
Yeah, right. And I think that's what's fascinating about her as a director is that she makes you forget, that things on screen are problematic, and only upon reflecting later, looking back on the films, you realize, oh yeah, that was not all right. But she has this ability to make you forget about these things, and I think that's very fascinating. Like she clearly plays with expectations and also maybe of just certain convictions of the audience and sort of how to undermine them or
Hmm.
to even break them in a certain sense, and then uh, to make the audience reflect on themselves and their own
Hmm.
reaction to what is to be seen on the screen. And yeah, I think one thing I really want to talk about with regard to this film is the notion of eroticism,
Hmm.
because
Yes.
even Breillat herself is almost contradictory when it comes to that term. Because
Hmm.
in an interview for the release of this film, for the premiere of the film, she says that she has always been anti-eroticism because she thinks it's a means of commodification of the male gaze on the female. Basically, that's what she
Mm.
says. Of course, you might resonate with that, but later in that same interview, she says that the views she captures, the gazes
Hmm.
of between the two characters here, the
Hmm.
30 something or 40-year-old woman and the
Hmm.
uh, 17-year-old boy or young man, that they are charged with eroticism, or like there's this
Mm.
erotic gaze. And
Hmm.
it's strange to me. And I think that is something that you cannot escape talking about this film, because it's really sexually charged, don't you think? Like the way the camera lingers on these characters, and
Hmm.
if you see the two engaged in sexual activities, the camera really stays on them, and throughout them
Hmm.
climaxing or something, like the
Hmm.
camera stays on them and is really invested in uh, arousing the audience as well. And I think
Hmm.
that's I don't know how you feel about that. I think it seems almost contradictory, and I wonder. how to approach that.
Hmm. The way that I see it is that what her camera is able to capture perhaps is the character's internal desires that are manifesting in that erotic moment. I don't know. I'm not, maybe I shouldn't try to defend what she's saying in terms of this contradictory statement of not being interested in showing eroticism. What is eroticism that she speaks of when she says that? Is it simply sexiness? I do think that these characters that we've seen do not display so-called sexiness, not classical, but they don't often appear to try to seem sexy, but they just naturally happen to engage in this erotic tension through the gaze that they share or through the long duration that she also places by having the camera linger on them during a sex scene or during a scene where we see just them enjoying themselves, that pleasure, that desire that's finally come to the surface. And I think that that is what she is able to do in a way that I haven't really seen other filmmakers achieve, which then innately must get at the audience. I don't know how you see it that way, but I feel like it's more of an internal recognition of her characters. How can it be an internal recognition if it also is a camera that is external? But it, I mean, twice really the camera lingers primarily on Anne's face,
Right.
um, as she orgasms, and we see her face essentially. I don't know. I can't really describe it. One has to see the film, but there's a recognition that some deep pleasure has overcome her. And Breillat lets us see that pleasure that the character has experienced. But there's also a slight conflict, which I think is what makes her film and the acting by Lea Drucker quite persuasive
Right. And
in those scenes. Yes, sorry.
yeah, and I think the word maybe that I would, almost equate with eroticism here is desire. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you see these faces, I think what you see in these faces is desire. And so it's so fascinating to see how these two seduce each other and
Mm-hmm.
how you can see the conflicting
Mm-hmm.
faces, how
Yes.
they
Yes.
are torn
Mm-hmm.
between two poles, or maybe even more. And but mm, so I think the notion of eroticism, maybe, it may have different appearances,
Mm-hmm.
and so I wouldn't just dismiss this notion. I think she does do that in an interesting way. I think it's also worth noting that, you know, like Verhoeven, even though much less
Mm-hmm.
comedic,
Mm-hmm.
this also at times really is in campy territory.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes even very soapy at times, but I think the actors are doing a good job here, so it does, it becomes not overt,
Mm-hmm.
but this is certainly at play, at least, in my reading, this is certainly at play here as well.
I thought these actors also must be fantastic theater actors. There was a way that they were able to manipulate the duration of the takes and different weaving through the seduction without feeling completely too forced. But I do also see the campy aspect that you're talking about. Um,
And Bria also, stays true to herself in the sense that, this actor, like
mhm,
of the boy, he was 17 when they shot the film. So again,
mhm,
uh, that's I don't know what the legal boundaries are here, but I guess 17 is all right. But it's still, I think there is this aspect of uneasiness that really translates to the audience as well.
mhm. Yes, I cannot say. I do not know what the legal boundaries are either.
Yeah, I guess it's like one of these gray zones, basically, like gray areas when you,
Hmm.
for instance, see young people smoke in films or something.
Hmm.
I guess it's often just they have to have like parental agreement or something. And here, I guess still, if you're 17, I suppose you still need parental agreements for shooting certain films. But it's just one one may think that, oh, she would hold back now, but
Hmm.
no, it's still in that sense it's really transgressive, and I'm not
Hmm.
saying that positively or negatively. It's just
Hmm.
transgressive. It doesn't.
Hmm.
It is not in accordance with our our sets of values, maybe too.
Yeah, she's entering territory that people right now making films are just simply trying to avoid if they can.
Exactly. And just in terms of these effect the two actors have on each other, I
Hmm.
really loved how this film grasps this sort of juvenating effect
Hmm.
on her. Like
Yes.
she she's she senses the attraction of this boy, and you can see her like you know rejuvenating like on the screen. You can see
Hmm.
her becoming younger and maybe more.
Vibrant?
Yeah, becoming
No.
more vibrant as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, and
It really did evoke the idea of just feeling in love and being young, even though we see on screen that she is not, but it doesn't even, over the course, it didn't even seem like this anymore. This, of course, there's another point in the plot that is not actually overt at all, and I think I haven't seen Queen of Hearts. I don't think you have either. But it does seem to me from a little trailer that I watched that the older woman seduces the younger in the Danish version. And here I think we have a little bit more nuance.
right,
Also, which is a big plot point that goes slightly under the radar, that is not explored, is that An is a lawyer who advocates on behalf of minors who have been sexually abused or assaulted. That is as intriguing as the inclusion of a 17-year-old actor to play the role of Theo.
right. And
And
it's
I wonder,
also, the
yeah,
way the film starts, right? That's like we see
yes,
her doing that job,
yes, she's advocating or giving advice on how the child should best represent themselves
which
in
also,
court. Is that?
yeah, which is also, a line of continuity to
Hmm.
Anatomy of a Fall, like how to present
Hmm.
oneself legally.
And May December in some
Oh
sense.
yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true.
But what I'm impressed too, in the same way as, maybe I shouldn't say impressed, but what it also does in the same way that it's May December, it's not concerned at all with trying to understand why this sort of a relationship might manifest. It just lets it happen. And I think that in some ways there is a refreshing element to seeing films that are not being filmed anymore due to, very understandably, our political climate. And yes, just to see someone who dares to step into those grounds.
Yeah, and that book by Elena Ferrante came to mind, even though I didn't read it. I just know the title. Read her Naples stories, but I didn't read that. But her last big novel, I think, was something called like the Lying Adults or something, or like the life of the lying adults or something. And
Hmm.
and here this film plays with that as well, like who is to be trusted, right? Like
Mm.
is it the adolescent in maybe an attempt for attention or something, or like
Hmm.
in a search for attention, or is it the wife, And
Mm.
I oh yeah, please.
It's true, we haven't talked at all about this. I mean, if it's not revealing too much, but at some point it becomes a big deal where this relationship perhaps cannot maintain itself. And we have a big lie and a big gaslighting episode that occurs. I don't know if you want to talk more about that or that.
No, I don't know. Yeah, I think it's maybe too much, in spoiler territory, but
Okay.
I still like that part in general, maybe more on a, in a conceptual sense than how
Mm-hmm.
it played out in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think it grasped interesting ideas that I think are worth pursuing. I don't know if it was always incredibly successful here, but
Mm-hmm.
I nonetheless appreciated it. The novel I also mentioned earlier is called The Lying Life of Adults. So
The
by
Lying Life of
Yeah,
Adults.
so I think, and in that sense, this film also played on that. I just to mention that this film is sort of plot heavy, I suppose, or at least it
Mm,
becomes that way. Um,
right.
but she every now and then finds nice symbols and nice just visuals to make it fun throughout. Like there's this scene that could already be seen ahead of the festival or like promo material where we
Mm-hmm.
see her son behind the window while she is in the foreground with her husband, and the son is
Mm-hmm.
like only in boxer shorts, and really lascivious, looking at her and lascivious. I don't know.
Lasciviously? Okay, we can look it up
I,
later.
okay, that was very
Mm-hmm.
comedic, and I think
Yes.
my audience, laughed a lot in that scene. There's also that scene, because evidently, the husband that she's with, she's not, entirely happy in that relationship, and there's this scene when she is gifted a bracelet, and this bracelet sort of evokes the idea of, cup, of handcuffs. you know
Mm.
like it's very
Yes.
close to that, like at least in my reading.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's this great last shot, I think, that,
Where jewelry plays another role.
yeah, where sort of the dialogue and what we see on the screen there really nicely intertwined. And I think that will be like in Amasseur, or in English Fat Girl, that will be one of the endings that I will definitely, bear in mind for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think we should also, before we go to the next film, maybe we should mention that this was Breillat's first film in 10 years. Her last film, I think, was the one called Abus de Faiblesse, and that starred Isabelle Huppert. The reason that she didn't make a lot of films recently is that she's chronically fatigued. She has a disease, it's called hemiplegia,
Mm.
and this makes her fatigued all the time, and it has an impact on her brain. And yeah, even this film, I mean, right, she was approached by Said Ben Said, as you said, so it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't even like her idea to make that film. I think it's for her, it's not a natural occurrence to like remake another film because she's such an original director.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and even like, I looked into that original film here, into Queen of Hearts, and it has such a fundamentally different tone. It's much more dramatic, and it's much more in its images. It's very cold, as you might expect from like a Scandinavian film. It seems more like almost like a crime film. It's
Mm-hmm.
very desaturated.
Mm-hmm.
And here, so yeah, I guess one has to hope that she still has the strength in her to continue making films in the future.
Yes. Thank you for sharing that. And so then that brings us to another filmmaker who's also paving her own path and making films that I feel instinctively I don't see are being made the way that she quite makes them. Alice Rohrwacher's La Chimera. This film is her fourth feature film, following Corpo Celeste, The Wonders, Happy as Lazzaro, Lazzaro Felice. We probably should have mentioned that it was also Triet's fourth feature film. And La Chimera takes place in the 1980s Italy, where we follow Arthur, played by Josh O'Connor, who's an Englishman, a part of a group of tomb raiders, or tombaroli, as they call it. Very early on, we learn that he is not interested in excavating these tombs for their valuable antiquities, but rather because he's in search of a portal or a door to the afterlife. Would you like to talk about this film or how your viewing of it was? I think we had very different instinct ideas, and you actually saw it twice, didn't you?
Yeah, I did see it twice because the first time I found it a bit overburdening, just also because, I wasn't in the best shape that night. Cannes at some point it just drags you down and you have to try to stay true to your senses, stay alive, just. And so I felt like I really needed a second watch to maybe, you know, get a better understanding of what's going on here. And of course, you always have the advantage that if you see a thing for the second time, if you see a film for the second time, you have the chance of, of focusing on certain aspects of the films that only later in the film gain significance. So it was good to it was good to know what this film was going for, so I could from the start pay attention to that. And yeah, I think I saw a lot of continuity lines to Lazaro, um,
Mm-hmm.
which, of course, you have really the the unique aesthetics of Alice Rohrwacher. She she's someone who advocates, for analog filmmaking, and
Mm-hmm.
these films look just beautiful. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it's very grainy. It's very, it plays with different aspect ratios.
Mm-hmm.
Even Lazaro back then, I think, was in like almost square, the
Mm-hmm.
aspect ratio. Here it has different ones, and I think it sort of changes maybe. I think that would be something to, keep in mind for another watch. I think that's also, it might change when there are dream sequences or something.
Yes, I wasn't able to keep track of that on the first viewing, but I believe she did use 16 millimeter, Super 16, and 35.
Right.
So three different film stock formats. Did you want to talk more about the dream sequences or about anything?
Uh,
I've interrupted you. I'm sorry.
yeah, maybe just it's also, you already draw on some parallels between Alice Rohrwacher and Justine Triet, and maybe just to mention that both of them more or less had their debut like 10 years ago. Like
Mm-hmm.
Alice Rohrwacher like 2 years earlier, but still they seem to be part of a similar, if not the same generation. And
Mm-hmm.
this is, good to see how they have progressed over time. I think, in the sense, you could argue that this is her film of the biggest scale so far. I'm, that's not to say that I liked it the most, but it's really
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of what she's capturing here, what she's
Mm-hmm.
accomplishing here. It's not to be neglected that this sort of has a different scope, maybe. Yeah, it feels grander in its ideas, it feels grander in its themes. Also, when I mentioned that there are sort of continuity lines to Lazaro, here the protagonist is again a sort of outsider. You
Mm-hmm.
already sort of hinted at that when you said that he's not so much interested in the valuables that
Mm-hmm.
they might gain from their grave digging. But it's rather, Rohrwacher even plays with that element, because there's one scene later when we have the fabulous Alba Rohrwacher,
Oh,
who
yes.
plays a sort of antagonistic figure here, whom they always consult, even though until a certain point of the film she's anonymous, in the sense that you don't know who she really is. Like, you don't see her on screen, and
Mm-hmm.
the characters don't know what she is like. I think her name is Spartacus. Oh yeah, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think we have to move a little bit backwards, but yes, so they're tomb raiders, a group of tomb raiders, and every time they find loot, they take it to a person named Spartacus or Spartaco,
Right,
or I don't remember either.
that's all right.
And this is a person with no face. We never see them appear, and it's only later, perhaps it's a bit of a spoiler. Oops, that we realize that it's Alba Rohrwacher,
Right.
and it turns into a whole entire commentary on the illicit trade of pillaged antiquities.
Right, but just before we go into that, I wanted to go on here with the continuity to Lazzaro. So he's really sort of, this Arthur guy. He's sort of an outcast. Of course, he doesn't
Hmm.
really speak Italian fluently. He has this English background. He comes from prison, actually, and
Yes.
one can just suspect what happened, but I guess it's not too difficult to figure out what may have occurred here. He also seems to have these supernatural abilities to find these graves,
Hmm.
to find these tombs, and then he lives really uh, you know, right, like he lives in a shed, and the shed is
Hmm.
adjacent to the city walls. So he really is this sort of outcast and this sort of figure of the periphery here.
Hmm.
And what I was going to go for here is that when he eventually meets Alba Rohrwacher's character, uh, then he there's this scene when the film becomes surrealistic, and we see how the people who are all really greedy for what they might gain from selling this one valuable that they find.
Hmm.
Yeah, don't have to go into what, but so
Hmm.
they want to sell this, and you can see that they have all dollar signs in their eyes, not literally, but we just hear them as like dogs barking, and
Hmm.
we hear them like grunting or like growling.
Growling,
Yeah,
yes. You hear them growling.
growling. So it's this sort of almost like Lynchian surrealism in that moment, and I think that also gives us a sense that he's not like the others. He is more like a Lazaro supernatural person who is really uncorruptible, but also maybe he doesn't quite pertain to the same reality as the other ones.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I do see what you're saying. I feel like the character of Lazzaro came straight from like the Piero character in Commedia dell'arte, this naive, innocent, pure person who exists in an almost ethereal plane that's been placed in a position of where people will most likely take advantage of him,
Yeah, and
and then
also
as a
maybe the like alien perspective, right?
yes, yes, I can't recall very well, but I do remember this alienation as he walks around on the roads of bucolic Italy, which also seems to be a theme where Rohrwacher continuously returns to in terms of placement of shooting. And so for me, Arthur was like a hardened version of this Lazzaro character. Both of them are also dressed in all white, but Arthur, he evokes more of for me at least, he evoked more of a most recently Pacifiction, Benoit Magimel, but also back to Fitzcarraldo in these white, this just pristine white suit that then becomes tarnished as the film goes on. And there's something colonial about his presence, given that he's also an Englishman in Italy, and this also this extra element of not belonging. But there's still something perhaps that one might read into of being beyond the natural desires and greed of the other people that he shares his company with.
Oh, but that's interesting because this notion of colonialism is sort of undermined by the film, right? Because he's sort of doing these Italians a service. Like he uses his abilities, in their interest. And of course, this is again sort of ambiguous because what are they doing there? They are basically just plundering the national heritage,
Hmm.
that is not for the public, that was never intended for the public. And then this is sort of one of the film one of the subjects the film is interested in, right? Like
Hmm.
to whom do these tombs belong? Like, are
Mm-hmm.
they like eternal souls that should not be bothered, like they should not be dug out at all?
Mm-hmm.
Or there's this phrase that occurs twice or
Mm-hmm.
thrice. Does it belong to everyone or to no
Mm-hmm.
one? And in a sense, they are not opposite poles. They are the exact same thing. And the film also develops that further, that in the end we have this sort of almost like a commune of the women, which was the term again when you just enter.
Squat?
Yeah, they squat this
Mm.
old
Train
yeah,
station. Mm.
old train station or railway building, and then make it their home. And then
Mm-hmm.
again, this question pops up: to whom does this building belong? Because it was empty. It has been
Mm-hmm.
empty for such a long time. So to whom does it belong? To whom do these graves belong? And yeah, I think that's in general that's an interesting and fascinating,
Mm-hmm.
idea to follow.
Yes, no, and just simply the idea of digging under the ground and finding treasures that belong to the historical past of a country. And once again, the who to whom do these memories, this history, do these artifacts belong, and whether they should or should not be disturbed. And it takes Arthur, who has this divine gift in some sense, to find them, to find what is literally beneath their feet all along. So I guess that outsider perspective also interests me in that he is English. I don't, but you are right, it doesn't necessarily play, he sort of undermines that. But it's curious to me to have this figure from the outside who can recognize what has been, that hasn't been seen. And that there is also another plot point that goes on where the Tomb Raiders are twice called cogs in a larger machine.
Hmm.
Um,
Right. And then, when the image even literally
yes, the image
transitions
does
to that.
literally. Yes, yes. And it this film did enter more political territory than I thought it would, without definitively stating anything, nor without, and I think there was a bit of some characterization of what this type of activity would be like.
Yeah, I think to me it just overall, I think the problems I had and still have with this film is that I think these themes not always come together very organically, very naturally. Like, there are a lot of themes in there, but I don't think that they, in the end, really amount to something that is greater than the individual parts. I often think, oh, this is a great scene, this is a fascinating idea, but this thread, and we have the
Mhm.
literal thread in this film, the
We
red
do.
thread.
Hmm. Hmm.
This, I don't know, I don't, I cannot say that I was entirely convinced that, that the narrative here pushes something forward with a certain amount of urgency. Uh, I still think it's a very fascinating film to see, and I would definitely recommend it. It just that even even with Lazaro, I felt more that this follows, a greater concept, and I think things in that film moved more organically together than they did here.
Again, I understand that. I think for me, I was just taken by the heart of this film. I know it's a very silly thing to say, but just taken by the heart and the soul and the fascination with youth, the digging through earth and engaging with mythology, and a desire of the impossibility of connection and the threads that connect each other, even though I did feel too that she threw a lot of things at us in the meantime, that sort of distracted. But to me, it felt all relevant in some very abstract way, as if this is the way that I think. So I think that's also why I was very, yeah, I think that's also why I had a different and very biased subjective viewing of this film. And there were some just beautiful shots. Like, I really like that shot where I don't remember if it's the first or the second tomb that they explore, and we just see, as if they're looking straight into the womanhood of a tomb, just this oval opening, and we see the faces of the tomb raiders looking, peering through. That just was not so much a violation even, but an exploration and a discovery. Arguably, there's nuance in the whole entire idea of pillaging, plundering, extracting things from the earth. But it appealed to me on many levels, even though this this is not always the best discourse.
Yeah, and of course, what's fascinating here is you mentioned soul and you mention mythology, and this is so much really clashing with these very economical urgencies that sort of force these uneducated people, to go for these hunts, these
Mm-hmm.
lootings. And Alice Rohrwacher also said that this very much was part of her upbringing, that often she would encounter people who found Etruscan valuables like in their gardens, just digging there, and
Mm-hmm.
there and I suppose still today there must be still so many things, in the ground that we don't know about, that we are not aware about. And I think this film even at some point reached this sort of cinematic magic, right? When we are in the inside of a tomb as it is opened, uh, as it is
Yes.
accessed, and you can
Yes.
see sort of effect that the entering air has on the valuables on the walls, that
Mm-hmm.
it all almost seems like a sort of oxidization, but that you would never be able to see unless you see a film, because of course we cannot be inside there and from the outside seeing that as at the same time it's not possible. So there you use the means of cinema in order to make that scene, but you also had a different interpretation of that scene, right?
And I think I thought of it more in the spiritual magic realism lens of the spirit, perhaps, of those tombs have been disturbed and have been released.
Right, exuding, right?
Given, yes, yes, they've been, the exposure has caused some effect on them.
Hmm.
I mean, in her synopsis, I don't know if it really played a big role, but the title of the film is La Chimera. And a chimera, or a chimera, is a mythological animal that is part lion, part goat, and part snake. And at some point, it is said of this Englishman that he has lost his chimeras. And in Alice Rohrwacher's synopsis, she says, everyone has their own chimera, something they try to achieve but never manage to find. And that's, I think, how the synopsis just starts. And perhaps I don't even entirely know what this means, but it's something speaks to me. There's also a lot of art logistic scenes. We see a huge statue being excavated from a tomb, and we see it almost with comedy being placed into a huge pallet and filled with soccer balls. So this is how this illicit antiquity gets transported. And after spending the majority of the film in the ground, we're released to the skies, where she ends the film with Gli Uccelli, The Birds, by Battiato, a beloved 70s, 80s Italian singer. So it was very hard for me to not like this film is all I'm saying. But I know I'm gonna stop saying that. So is there anything else that you'd look at, or
Uh,
something that...
no, I think we covered a lot here. There, of course, there are these unannounced meta elements as well, when there are
Mhm.
like fourth wall breaks. But I think, it's it seems more like a side note, even though like a very funny side note, like if you see that film play out, like if you see that scene play out. But yeah, it's nothing I would like to comment on further now.
All right. Well, that brings us to the end of this podcast. There's still many, many, many images or memories or just scenes, I think, right now of just that statue in Close Your Eyes by Victor Erice, that it bookends the film, where two people are connected
Right.
by the head like Siamese twins in some arrangement. I don't know if, do we still say that? But they're looking in different directions. And that is an image that will stay with me. And I thank you, Patrick, for joining me and hosting this podcast with me on Cannes. And perhaps later down the line, we'll see if we revisit some of our highlights of the festival. But right now, it's time that we wrap up.
Right. Yeah. Thank you so much for having these conversations together, and it was a lot of fun. Of course, there's still so many films worth discussing that we didn't get into yet. And who knows? Yeah, as you say, maybe there will be other recordings. But as of now, I have to say I'm also, I'm a bit fatigued by Cannes, and also looking forward. One still, what one always has to keep in mind after Cannes is before Venice.
Yes, yes. And I will not be joining you for Venice, but you will be writing for moviebreak.de for sure. And that's where people can find some of your reviews.
If you're a German speaker.
If you are a German speaker. To wrap up Cannes, as a final farewell, we shall give you a little bit of music that we hear every time a projection starts. Carnival des Animaux by Camille Saint-Saëns, specifically the aquarium portion of that song.
Yeah, the theme.
The theme. Thank you once again. Till next time.
Bye bye.
Ciao.